Gayatri Chakravorty Spivak has very kindly accepted our invitation to come south a bit and share with us today. She is university professor and founding member of the Institute for Comparative Literature and Society at Columbia University, and holds several honorary doctorates from institutions around the world, and formerly was a colleague or preceded you in Tarragona? Or was there as a...
I'm an alumni.
An alumni, okay. All right, there's the story. She's made significant contributions in a number of critical areas, including feminism, Marxism, deconstruction, and globalization. Her acclaimed translation with critical introduction of Jacques Derrida's De la Grammatologie appeared in 1976 under the title Of Grammatology. Among her many publications are A Critique of Post-Colonial Reason, Toward a History of the Vanishing Present in 1999, Death of a Discipline, 2003, Other Asias, 2005, and I believe still forthcoming, January, An Aesthetic Education in the Age of Globalization. Please join me in welcoming Professor Spivak.
It is a great pleasure to be here. The mic's working, right? You can hear me, okay. Great pleasure to be here. I like talking in the city. I live here. I'm a New Yorker. New York, nobody's weird in New York, and I'm interested in institutional change. And it seems to me, for me, this is a very local occasion. But I would also like to say that, although I genuinely agree with Anthony Pym on most of the things that he said in his speech, and especially the idea of not clinging to boycott politics. I've taken a stand against boycott politics again and again. But I think what we have to recognize is that there is a double bind at work here. You don't want, like in most things, you want not to be a follower of boycott politics, nothing changes, but at the same time, you have to acknowledge that the idea that there are no national boundaries within scholarship is not allowed us, unfortunately. The history of the difficulty with which scholars from the West Bank travel, or sometimes do not travel, to conferences. I run lots of special events. This is deplorable. I'm a green card holder, which was lifted in Kosovo on the 20th of May, and I'm traveling now on a little stamp given to me by the Homeland, whatever they're called, authorities, what are they called? Homeland what? Security, there we go. This little stamp allows me until June 12th, okay? I just came back from Poland, so therefore this is here. And it contains a visa for the United Kingdom for 10 years, which cost $1,055. So it's not really something that one can just ignore. So we should say, as I say, it's a double bind. I'm against when Karatani says that boycott politics is the only politics for academics today. I write internationally to say, sorry, I can't be there. But at the same time, I think it is necessary not to simply declare, and I think Anthony is very aware of this, that it doesn't put you in a minority of one, it puts you in a minority which takes this binary opposition and goes either on this side or that side. But actually, Anthony does recognize the double bind, because in fact he's worried about it. So I would like to say that this is something that should be thought through, rather than simply say that the ones who are saying boycott are just denying the freedom of scholars. I've written a piece called, I mustn't go to, if I start ad-libbing, since I read my speech, I can't read the whole of my speech, I want to read it. But nonetheless, I've written recently a piece called Subduing Byzantium, which I gave in a city in Hungary which called itself borderless, Pech. And the thing is, because I lost my passport for a few hours, I left it on the plane, I'm very absent-minded, I actually couldn't get there at all. I mean, Denmark couldn't give me anything, the Hungarian consulate couldn't give me anything, the Indians couldn't give me anything because I hadn't the passport. I was sitting there, I said, I'm not that important, it's okay. Without me, the conference will go forward. And so what I told them was, it's like during the anti-Vietnam War demonstrations, Phil Oakes had a fantastic song which was called "I Declare the War Is Over." So when when he sang it, I was you heard how old I was when we sang it the first time. Phil Oakes was in fact he was singing, and then of course we all sang, etc. And what this Texas boy, Phil Oakes, said was, I'm now going to sing a futuristic song. And many, many years later, when Derrida started talking about all politics being in the mode of to come, I thought that half-educated boy from Texas, Phil Oakes, that was his way of saying to come. It's a futuristic song. So even as, you see, this is how one copes with double binds. Even as you say there are no borders, even as you say, I declare the war is over, the declarative is only in the mode of to come. And I would suggest that within the working of translation studies, this is something that we might keep in mind. We are not, in fact, on a level playing field, first of all. Secondly, this idea of translation studies, and I'm as troubled by my friend, Larry Venuti, as in some ways, he's also your friend, but you are also troubled in that sort of a way. First page of his introduction to very popular book on anthology, where unfortunately I'm also included, the first page says, translation studies is now becoming a discipline. Now that's where scholars like me come in. Disciplinarization. It seems long ago, Burton Bledstein in the 70s wrote a book on disciplinarization, which still retains its pertinence. And the idea of disciplinarization, I believe in disciplines. I think disciplines, in fact, construct you, help you epistemologically. It shows you how to construct an object for knowledge. So I'm not against disciplines, and I take the challenge of interdisciplinarity incredibly seriously. It's an easy word, but in fact it's hardly ever done successfully. So therefore, this is not someone who's out, again, a double bind, as it were. But the moment you disciplinarize something, the laws that start to work are not the substantive laws of the action that is the content of the discipline, but the abstract laws of disciplinarization, which are very, very old. So to an extent, there has to be something. I mean, I'm doing this now. The reason why my green card was stolen in Kosovo was because I also run a little group that looks into the disciplinarization of preservation. So to an extent, disciplinarization for us is a problem. And that's another reason, because I'm not really in translation studies. I'm not a translator. I happen to have translated stuff and written on translation when friends have requested me to do so. I'm not really a major player in translation studies. I was deeply impressed by your account of what you were doing. So to an extent, on the other hand, this stuff that it is a discipline now, it is becoming a discipline now, that also brings me here. Having said this, I would, but you, I notice, has written very recently that as Bergson maintained, writes Badiou, a philosopher only ever develops one idea. Now, I'm not a philosopher, but a cat can look at a king. So if there is one idea that has always occupied me, it's the idea of the necessity of vanguards. How this is an idea in many different, I mean, in the beginning, I unfortunately mentioned the other end of vanguardism, the subaltern, and unfortunately, since everybody wants to do good in the discipline, I've never been able to shake that one off. But in fact, what I was thinking about when I was much younger was and David Damrush, who's sitting in the back, knows, because I just gave a talk for him, which I very much enjoyed giving at the Institute of World Literature in Beijing, which the title of which was Supplementing the Vanguard, because this has been my main thing right from the start, one idea. And to an extent, what I'm also looking at is how the translation vanguard is beginning, not just beginning, for some time operating. When it takes its base, talking about whatever, where even when it is being benevolent and saying, I don't believe in this powerful position, how by reversal does it legitimize that position? Because in the place of a plus, a minus is substituted. In the interest of that, now when I speak to Anthony was turning to me when he was saying the United States, I want to see how American theory operates. And indeed, I am an American also. I've lived here 50 years. I've taught here full-time 45 years, at the beginning of my 46th year of full-time teaching. But on the other hand, this double bind, the thing that keeps my passport and so on, makes me also try at least to speak from that other side. More or less 3 semesters worth of work is done every year by me in India, so that's a very large, I'm part of a very large majority there, 86% majority, often violent. So that this whole thing of being a minority, other culture, when the benevolent translators are speaking, but also being a majority, a violent, active majority, a well-known person in India, that those two kind of work together. I'm not here to report on my culture as other. And so to an extent, I wanted to say some things, and this will take away from my reading time, which I hope will amuse you. Now, I was born a Hindu, okay, large polytheist heteropraxy. Now, the Hinduism contains within itself atheism, Nastic. It's a Hindu heteropraxy can take care of people who do not believe that is. Okay, Asti is, Nastic is not. It's taken care of. Old, wily religion. Now, so therefore, my philosopher cousin, Tara Chatterjee, and I, more or less without discussing, devised that to be something like an atheist within Hinduism was perhaps not to believe in the soul, the immortality of the soul. That translation is also a hopeless translation of the word Atman, which is cognate with the Greek atmos, a kind of souling, always mistranslated by Hindu philosophical thinkers. For example, I have suggested that Maya should not be translated illusion, as it always is, but fiction, because of various things within the vast and complicated Hindu cultural discourse. Heteropraxis. We are not a people of the book. So we have no book, although efforts are made constantly. So from that point of view, we decided that not to credit the Atman, because even belief is a peculiar word, because you're within it, right? Atmos, what do you do? So, because the possibility of selfing, after all, cannot not be believed in, as you're a double bind, as you're constantly selfing yourself. So, to an extent, that's the position we've come to say we are something like an atheist. We are not a believer in the strict sense. So, from within that situation, I would like to tell a couple of stories, and then I'll read my paper. Because when I speak in Europe or the United States. I generally do not speak about South Asia. I'm not someone there for information retrieval, okay? But this came up, okay? In the early 80s, I left my passport on the yellow box near the VAT counter in London Heathrow. And I only discovered this in the middle of the flight, and so I told, this was 80s, right? I was on a Pan-American flight. I told the guy, look, telex your folks and tell them that a third world citizen is coming in without papers. I have no passport, no visa, nothing. So no green card. So he was so scared, he gave me a free glass of whiskey. I was in economy. And I said, no whiskey, because if I'm kept, the only thing that I can do is work. I have work with me. You just tell them. Okay, so he told them, okay? So I got down without anything. So there was an agent who took me to the visa counter. There was an African-American woman. Today she would not be able to do anything. But there was a kind of woman-to-woman thing. She said, I waived the requirements for visa and passport. You go through that door that says no admission, and my boss, Mr. Mavrocordato, is going to give you a temporary green card immediately, and then you will. So I went. And so I got a temporary green card immediately, bought a glass of whiskey then, and called my mum. And I said, Ma, see, the entire crowd is still waiting, Ma, out there. And I got in. And so I told her, we are Bengali speakers, obviously. I wasn't speaking to her in English. And I said to her, Ma, jekhai tini, take jogan chintamani. Very bad translation when come out. The person, because it's based, the first thing that is killed in translation is sound, right? So it's based on a kind of pun. Chini is sugar. The person who eats sugar, Chintamani, is a lord of thought. See, Chini Chintamani, there's a thing. The lord of thought provides, I said to my mom. And what did my mom say? My mom was not quite a non-believer in the Atman. She was a very philosophical Hindu who believed, she told me many, many times because I would laugh at her, who believed in a world force. And so was one, she had lots of Christian friends, lots of Jewish friends, she was ecumenical, anti-casteist, plain living, high-thinking, intellectual, wonderful woman. Anyway, so what did my mom say? And my mom said, na. Shoda Prabhu amar palo kamar abhav hoibe na. Psalm 23 in Bengali. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Shoda Prabhu is Lord, right? So this is what she said. So why? Because my mother went the first few years to Christchurch School. And see, the Indian Hindus were a tough nut to crack for the missionaries, the upper caste Hindus. Remember Aryanism? And so there was this, she went to Christchurch School, and then she went to Brahmo Girls College, and Brahmo Girls School, I can't even explain what all of that is, because I'm not an information giver about South Asia. You can look it up somewhere, BRAHMO, very interesting. But at any rate, I went, on the other hand, Bengali medium school, our instruction was in Bengali, but I went to St. John's Diocesan Girls High School, okay? Now, diocesan made me, undoubtedly. And St. John's Diocesan Girls High School, it's the oldest parish church. Job Charnock's tomb is there in Calcutta. It was not a convent school where the teachers were white nuns and so on. It was, we were taught by upper caste Hindus, upper class Muslims. We were taught by Christian converts from the so-called low castes and the aboriginals that were there when, between 5,000 and 8,000 years ago, the so-called Aryans, the Indo-European speakers, came in. Now, as a result, my parents were extremely smart in putting us in this school. As a result of this thing that the church dealt well with these people whom we had treated like dogs. They were our teachers. They were teaching upper caste Hindus and upper class Muslims. I cannot explain to you what kind of passion this teaching came with. As I say, my school made me. And my role model was Miss Das, who was Das, that's a surname which comes from a very, very low caste indeed, Ms. Charuwala Das, our principal. And more the years go by, the more she becomes my role model. And now I want to take you to a completely different kind of scene, and then I will read my paper in, well, I've already spent half an hour, so I'll just kind of stop when, I think I can't read anymore. But I think it's important to say these things. I have had these schools when you talk about enculturation and going and taking this, when I was first doing POCO in the 80s, post-colonial, in the early 80s, really for a narcissistic reason, because I was becoming recognized. The moment I realized that this was POCO, I became its critic. But I was doing this, and I did write irresponsibly about Christianization of the Indians, etc., not recognizing how complicated this situation is. It's not just a power thing at all. So, I've given you an example. But on the other hand, I've also given you an example of how we have taken it in, we Hindus, without really losing anything. So to an extent, it's like an invagination, as Derrida said, the part becomes bigger than the whole. So, my mother, there's even an 18th century hymn. I generally sing, but you're a little scary to me, so I won't sing. I'll just quote it. An 18th century hymn which says, Isha Musha Sri Chaitanya, Tomar Preme Achaitanya. In other words, Jesus, Moses, and Sri Chaitanya, who's a bhakti person, they are senseless in love for you. It's a hymn to Kali. So it's a hymn to a goddess. So, and then the song begins, Amai Dema Pagal Kare, make me crazy. Mother, make me crazy. And then you go on. So that to an extent, this whole business of not incarnations, that's not what we say, but come down people, right? Avatars. So we kind of, today it's all changed because politics has mobilized hostility between Christians and Hindus, Christians and Hindus and Muslims in a certain way, that's another discourse. But in our childhood, singing this hymn to Kali, 18th century, we took this name without any problem at all. So that kind of inculturation, as I said, the Hindus were a big problem to an extent. So in many ways. So therefore, now one example, and then I'll read what I can. So I have run schools among the very, very poor in West Bengal, because I have to do it because that's the only language I know really well. I know it better than English, my first language. So for the last 25 years. And unfortunately, now the government requires English, but many of my teachers who are high school graduates and so on and so forth, really trying hard, when they went to school, there was no English, there was no requirement. So for these people to teach English, it's almost impossible, right? But they try. So as I'm doing the last day's full training, all of my teachers are sitting there, we are talking, I'm speaking Bengali, obviously, and, I ask questions, and one of my teachers she's kind of new. He's constantly putting in English words, okay? And he's wrong. On the other hand, I can't tell him you're wrong because he's really trying, eh? So at a certain point he says, conjunction. I say, hey, come on, okay, I'll give you an example. And what example do I give them? Because Miss Das was aware that this was a classroom with Hindus, Muslims, and Christians, the morning prayer was, be thou, O Lord, above us to draw us up, beneath us to sustain us, before us to lead us, behind us to restrain us, round about us to protect us. Can you imagine what a good example this made in that class of complete subalterns, according to the Gramscian example, that is to say, with no access to the structures of welfare in the state. Okay, that's a subaltern. What a good example, as word by word, I would say, I wouldn't even translate because I was doing it with gestures as Chinese students in mud schools do. Their incredible writing with their bodies. But imagine that. So to an extent, it also traveled back all that way. So what I would like to say is that when we talk about whether we want the word enculturation or what happens, unless one imagines the person who receives in a much more, it's like reading a text. You know, if you're reading Flaubert quickly in Bengali translation, as I did Madame Bovary, for the first time I read it in Bengali translation. Also Les Miserables, La Misérable, it said. So you read it in Bengali, good Bengali translation. Then you read it in English translation. And then you go into the French, and my copy of L'Éducation Sentimentale is completely crumpled because it fell in the bathtub. I was reading it, and my God, this is a different book. I'm not saying I'm against translation, but this is the way you need to know the subject at the other end if you are going to talk about any kind of cultural anything. It's not possible. But so what? And this is why, that's where people like me are located. Because the vanguard must do its work, the discipline must do its work. You should pay no attention to me at all, except when I'm telling you funny stories. But on the other hand, some of us do, and this is a big word, this supplementing, which pulls which is really directed towards what is called the future anterior. In other words, something will have happened, whatever the hell you plan. So the fact that that future will never be identical with what you're planning, and one hopes that it won't be identical, some of us have to work seemingly against the grain. We are not against the grain at all. This isn't completely autocritical. From within, we are not to be seen in that binary opposition model. We are your double bind. There are a few of us, but this has to happen. We cannot simply plan the short haul with nice concepts and so on. We have to look toward a future.